Hello, everybody. We're running a couple of minutes late. Apologies for that, but welcome and looking forward to this live call with Dave. And yeah, we've got some great questions that have come through. So I think we'll get straight into it. And so, Dave, the first general question, what are survival kits all about and why do they operate in our lives?
Well, survival kits are basically the thing you do when you don't know what else to do, so you make do. And survival kits are make do coping skills when you don't have a better way of coping. They're always begun in childhood, and they can be telling lies to get out of a tight spot. They can be exaggerating to make yourself more interesting. They can be avoidance. They can be running. Survival kits, what you do if there's not enough truth or training already present in your mind. And so they enable us to shelve the issue because we're not yet ready to face it. And so they are quick fixes, survival kits. Freud called them defense mechanisms. And so you could say that they're very similar to defense mechanisms. And just a good layman's term for the way you cope when you don't know how else to cope. And it may be just some way of trying to maintain face or maintain presence when your whole world is shattering around you. Therefore, intoxication is a survival kit, drugs are a survival kit, avoidance or even sarcasm is a survival kit, turning everything into a joke. Why? Because that vulnerability of transparency, you're not quite ready for that. And the trouble with them is that if we hang on to them, they actually create a false reality in adult life. And we end up not real and not living in reality. Our survival kits are where we hide. And it can be delusions of grandeur or delusions of powerlessness, delusions of victimhood, etc., etc. But between you and truth, you and Christ, you and progress, you and success is invariably your survival kit. But the reason people are so reluctant to give them up is because it is going to expose their unbearable feeling as soon as they do.
Okay, thanks very much, Dave, for that. And now we'll get into the questions that have come through this week. So I enjoyed hearing about the mind needing to be fully persuaded. Better ways and options can bring about substantial change. How about the person that has persuasion wielded to something negative, like coercion? How do you counsel people who avoid their minds being persuaded? How do they gain access to better options and abandon old survival kits?
Yes, this is a minefield, actually. I once upset an entire college class of counselling students when they questioned me as to what mode or what modality I was using. And I said, oh, I'm a persuader. And they almost ran screaming from the room because they'd just spent 6 months learning never to persuade as junior counsellors. But the point that I had to make was, if you confuse persuasion with coercion, then of course you're going to see persuasion as deeply disrespectful. But in fact, they are opposite ends of the scale. To the degree that you are a coercer, you are not actually persuading. And to the degree that you are persuading, you are not coercing. So I think of the proverb, a man persuaded against his will is of the same opinion still. And so what that means is we're going to take another look at this word persuasion. And as living wisdom counselors, we do persuade, we are persuaded, even as St. Paul confessed, I am fully persuaded. Even as our Lord said, absolutely, absolutely, I say to you, unless you this or unless you that, you can never this, you can never that. Christ was a persuader of men. He taught Peter to be a persuader of men. and certainly Paul was chosen as a persuader. And I think that we have a serious problem in our Christian counseling establishments when we opt for client-centered, paraphrasing, and amoral counseling that demands the myth of neutrality be subscribed to in order to be a respectful, skilled helper. That's a serious philosophical problem facing Christian colleges, because what it means is that our students are getting New Age philosophy under the guise of Christian respect and Christian counseling. And this is so subtle that even the intellectuals and the people with scholarly minds have been totally hooked in by this deception and thoroughly deceived. Now, in Living Wisdom, we bring a person to a place of crisis where they must be persuaded that their friend is their enemy, their survival kit is out of date, and that they absolutely must make friends with their unbearable feeling, or at least get used to it, before their behaviors will change and the manifestations will cease.
Oh, that's a very important understanding for us again. So, Dave, the father who says, I believe, help my unbelief, is there a process that helps us to be fully persuaded?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, there's no such thing as choice until you have options. And many people are depressed because they have no options. They're angry because they have no options. They are intimidated because they have no options. Many people are sexually addicted, or addicted to self-pity or abandonment or rejection, because there's no options being presented. So yes, I believe, but what I want to believe, but how do I do it? And so truth coaches give options. Insights gives the mind new ways of seeing it and processing it, new perceptions. And so you get a totally new perspective with truth coaches, and it gives your brain options. And then when you've got options, you've got free choice. You've really only got free choice when options balance out desire and habits. And so you can't be said to have a free will to break your habits and to cease your habits when your brain has alternative ways of processing the difficulties of life. And in Living Wisdom, we are insight-based and insight-motivated. We're not willpower-driven. We're not so worried about willpower. Even self-discipline is merely seen as the result of being inspired by a truth or inspired by a vision. So Living Wisdom is not behaviorism. It is not legalism. It is not try harder. It is not more willpower. More willpower, well, that was discredited as a heresy in the 1st century. Pelagianism, they called it in those days. And we just want to remind people that, you know, if you want to take a razor blade out of a baby's hand, you don't just grab the razor blade and tug. And I see a lot of that sort of helping going on. Mothers and fathers grab the razor blade and tug, and you end up with a bloody mess. And so what we need to do is offer the baby something bright and shiny and much more interesting, and they of their own accord will drop the razor blade and they will opt for the thing that is better. But it must not just be theoretically better. It must be seen to be better. It must be grasped as better. And then my client will heal themselves. They will dump the survival kit, they'll dump the dysfunction, and they'll go for the new way of coping. And what's even more amazing and profound is that they will never go back. They will not backslide. Their resolution will last more than a week. They will not go back, because what they've got now is better. And once you've grasped something better, Darren, you never go back.
Absolutely. So the power of the truth coach, or the new insight, the new way of thinking, is really the power of change.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm just thinking a little bit more about this persuasion and this moment of facing this, you call it bringing people to a point of crisis. Is it purely the power of the truth that brings them through that point of crisis, or are there some skills that we have to also take on board to support our people we might be helping, or ourselves?
Well, that's where I discovered that we need the empowering questions. The empowering questions bring you to the place of discovery, the place of crisis, the place of decision. The empowering questions will say, you know what you're doing, is it actually working? You know, to quote the Dr. Phil, the question that Dr. Phil made famous, and how's that working for you? And so this is an empowering question, and it does bring people to that point. Well, does my sulking actually work? Does my violence work? Does my anger work? Does marijuana actually work? Does the nicotine actually work? Is it actually working? They say in the alcoholics therapy, rational recovery, they say that there's actually only one call that the alcoholic must make to be healed, and that is the question, is my life better or worse for alcohol? Now, at a cognitive level, they all know it's worse, but the truth is they don't actually believe that at a much deeper level, and that's where we must bring them to that crisis. Is your life better for your anger or worse for your anger? When you are fully persuaded that anger only makes your life worse, and I'm talking tantrums, I'm talking sulking, and I'm talking violence, I'm talking rage, you understand that, I think, not just frustration. When you come to grips with the idea that anger only ever makes your life worse, it makes your kids afraid of you, it makes people stop trusting you, then and only then will you give it up. But as Derek Prince said, God will not deliver you from your friends, only from your enemies. And so the counselor's role is to help a person get crystal clear that this thing that they do is not actually their friend. It never has been, it never will be. And whenever they indulge it, it'll only ever make their life worse.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so next question. My lifelong survival kit is to plan ahead. It's hard to think of this as a redundant coping skill, as everyone benefits from my preparedness at home, work, socially, etc. However, I feel sheer panic when the unexpected happens. I think being organized is part of my personality, so how can I give up the survival kit? Underneath, I know I can't bear to waste time or live with regret. That sounds reasonable too, but I'd actually like a piece of that Hakuna Matata.
Well, I'm very happy for you to plan ahead. I'm very happy for you to be organized. I'm very happy for you to think ahead. Remember, it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark, and we're so grateful he was planning ahead. But as you say, the problem comes when you don't have any flexibility to go with it. And flexibility means a deep trust and a deep faith that everything's going to be okay. So planning ahead can be fear-based, as in your case, or it can be faith-based. I plan ahead. I have goals. I predict what I'm going to need. I think about that stuff, but I don't do it at midnight. I don't do it after I put the light out. I'm not lying in bed strategizing after dark. That would be to send my brain mixed messages, you know, wake up, wake up, wake, no, go to sleep, no, wake up. And so people worry too much because at least at some level they believe worrying keeps them safe. So go on planning by all means, but understand that nothing takes God by surprise. And if he's permitted it, then you can cope with it. And that just means you practice flexibility. You practice your plan B or your plan C. And you don't consider ambushes as dangerous. You're not always on red alert waiting for an ambush. You teach your inner child that nothing's going to happen today that I can't cope with, and that unexpected is not the same thing as danger. So you'll need to address a weld or a fusion in your brain that says unexpected equals ambush and ambush equals danger, and that must never, ever happen to me. So you've got two things going on there. You've got the fusion, and you've got the unbearable feeling, and you've got the survival kit. So I'm not going to take your survival kit off you. I'm just going to build in some flexibility and add it to it so that you're adaptable. If you think prepared and adaptable, you've got it made. You've got it sussed.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions that are looking at the whole area of fear as a survival kit. So the first one, in the videos, David mentioned panic being a survival kit. Can you talk about this a bit more, please?
Yes. Just before we do, can the people see me? Am I on screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So I just don't want to wave my hands around too much, but it helps, you know.
Yeah.
The thing is that panic is not so much the survival kit, but the unbearable feeling says, I'm inadequate for the challenge, I'm going to drown, I'm dying, I'm going under, I'm in a very dangerous situation. And panic is the natural neurological response to extreme alarm and too much adrenaline. So you've got to reassure yourself that this situation is probably not as dangerous as it feels. People go through their lives crucializing things that are not actually crucial, and they go through their lives exaggerating the danger. As Mark Twain said, my life has been filled with disaster and trauma, most of which never ever happened. And I think that that's a classic quote from Mark Twain. And I think that probably the Western illness of the modern day is crucializing stuff that isn't crucial. As a result, we're busy winding ourselves up all day, and panic is the natural response to that. But here's the problem. Panic as a default mood can give you adrenaline, and an adrenaline over-functioning adrenal gland, which means you've basically got a hair trigger adrenal gland that is dosing you in adrenaline all day long. You can get very sick from sustained adrenaline. And so every cell in your body is at battle stations. Your immune system becomes stressed, and sometimes it goes rogue and becomes an autoimmune disease. I'm quite convinced that unnecessary stress as a default mood sets people up for autoimmune inflammations and disorders. And I'm seeing more and more of it in our modern age. But I've got to tell you that truth coaches are primarily reassurances. And so the solution to panic is the right reassurance at the right moment. Truth coaches are only truth coaches if they are tailor-made and tailor-fitted to the anxiety that is triggering a person's alarm bells and adrenal gland, that is triggering a person's fight or flight responses. And the right truth coach, composed carefully and then applied to the mind at the right place and the right level, means that you get a deep reassurance that stays there for the rest of your life, as long as you bring it to mind as necessary. And I work very hard to make sure that the truth coach I apply as a dressing to the anxious mind of my client really does fit. It has to fit hand in glove. So that's why truth coaches are not always interchangeable. One size doesn't fit all. But there are a few generic truth coaches that can help. And it may be that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, or it may be that if God be for me, what can harm me? Or it may be my Father owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, but it may not be a scripture at all. It may simply be, hey, that was then, this is now. Or if a thing's worth doing, it's worth doing badly while I get better at it. So anything that reassures you, settles the adrenaline down, settles the stress down, and helps your brain do its proper job.
So the power of reassurance to settle the mind and to bring us back into peace.
You know what? Every baby is born in need of reassurance, and every mother gets a lot of practice in reassuring. The problem comes when she needs to reassure her own inner child. She can be a marvelous reassurer of her children and her baby. She knows how to do that. But what's she like at reassuring her own inner child when that inner child wakes up and cries? How does she treat herself? How does she speak to herself when she's in a flap, in a panic, in anxiety, or in fear? If she just gave herself the same kind of and quality of reassurance she gives her child, she would be fine. But the problem is that her domestic brain is not talking to her mummy brain. They're not sharing information and wisdom.
So is this the process of reparenting, Dave, that you're talking
Yes, it is. Yes, this is how we teach people to reparent themselves in the truth, with the truth, in Jesus' name, and to give themselves at a very deep level what their parents never gave them all those years ago, and then learn to hold on to it. We teach them to hold the hug. You know, some children leak hugs. You can hug them, but they're just a few hours later, they are disconsolate and needing comfort again. They become clingy because they don't know how to hold the hug. When you reparent yourself, you learn how to hold the hug.
Awesome. Okay, so please talk about echoes and how to get around them, especially what behavior would be helpful, e.g., having a fear response around certain men.
Yes, well, the fear of authority is usually an echo, and an echo is simply the memory that you're having when you don't realize you're having a memory. Does that make any sense? An echo is the memory you're having when you don't realize you're having a memory, and that means that you can get the feelings to go with the memory, but not the memory itself. And so the difficulty with that is that you misconstrue the situation as being the cause of the feelings, and you blame the person in front of you, or you blame the scenario in front of you, when actually you're getting hit by echoes from 5, 10, 30, or 50 years ago that have got covered up and buried to your conscious mind, but they're still there. And those subconscious lessons are still there. And that means that you project, you misinterpret, you misconstrue the present situation. And it also means that where you should be confident or competent or in control, you're a mess. You've got the collywobbles. Your strength is turning to jelly, and your mind is turning to custard because those echoes are actually dominating and taking over. And this is what we treat people for with sexual abuse, with post-traumatic stress disorder. And by the way, post-traumatic stress disorder is largely what happens when echoes eclipse reality. In other words, the feelings are overpowering what's actually happening. So unless you understand echoes and know what to do with them, you really cannot heal post-traumatic stress disorder. The echoes are more real than the predicament currently faced.
So, so healing the echo, is it about reconnecting the memory to?
Absolutely. In fact, we say revisit the episode, revisit the trauma, revisit the incident that you first remember having that feeling in. And the empowering question is, when did you first experience this feeling in your life? And who is now invoking it again for you? And when they're in touch with that memory, we revisit it and we revise it, our conclusions, our thoughts, our perceptions at the time, we revise it, and then we relinquish the habits and the survival kits and the defense mechanisms that we developed at the time. So psychotherapy can be summed up by revisit, revise, relinquish. Revisit the trauma, revise the beliefs and conclusions, and then relinquish the habits, the lifestyle, the survival kits that grew out of that time. And that is psychotherapy summed up.
Mm. Okay, so when we want our kids to apologize for something said or done to others and they don't want to, are we teaching them to be people pleasers if we say they have to? Reading the notes on apologizing for things you aren't even when you aren't even at fault for, and that peacekeeping is a form of people pleasing. I've been taught in the past to be humble and to do this in a marriage situation. And what's that about? So just trying to get some clarity on that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That, you know, without being too blunt or too harsh, that comes back to lazy parenting. Lazy umpire syndrome, I call that. It suits the parent to have a quick fix to the dispute. It suits the parent for a quick save of face. It suits the parent for the child to apologize and face is saved and the conflict is theoretically is over and then we can move on. And sometimes that works. I don't want to knock it completely, but I do want to say that you set up a crazy maker and you set up behaviorism and you set up hypocrisy when you're satisfied that somebody has said the sorry word, but not only are they not sorry, they don't regret it for a moment, and now they feel cheated of justice. They feel like an injustice has been done. Parents can't be trusted because parents don't want to know the ins and outs. Who really cares anyway? Or you can get off the hook just by saying sorry and then go on straight into passive aggressive, which is so detrimental and so toxic to future relationships. And it gets to the point where adults can grow up believing, not actually knowing what sorry means because they've been sent this mixed message. Now, let's be clear about this. Sorry means I regret the behavior and I will endeavor with all my strength never to repeat it. But we've got adults today who say sorry and don't give it a second thought because they've been schooled not to understand what sorry is. And so I try as a personal discipline, I don't say it further and say, I regret what happened, I regret what I did, because that is the sorry word expressed and spelled out. And by the way, when somebody says sorry, what they're supposed to be doing is inviting you to reassess them. An apology is an invite to be reassessed. But if you're inviting them to reassess you, but you haven't got the least desire or expectation to actually change, you're actually deceiving them. You're practicing deception. If you say sorry to keep the peace, but you have no intention of regretting your behavior, then you're actually practicing hypocrisy, which is inauthenticity. So please talk to your kids and say, look, I don't expect you to say sorry until you regret it, but you need to regret it. And so we're not letting this go until you understand why you need to regret it. Please choose your battles. You can't be doing that every 5 minutes. But there comes a point where you say, you know what, saying sorry is not enough here. I need you to express your regret for what you said and did, and I need you to understand why it's unacceptable behavior. And we're not going forward until you can assure me you've got that message sorted.
Okay, changing channels here a little. So food can also be a survival kit. Is that what is meant with binging? What is the way forward here, or possible way forward?
Yes, well, if you didn't discover love, then food is a counterfeit for love. And so pleasant food, comforting food, which results in obesity and health disorders and eating disorders, can try to substitute for love and try to substitute for insight and truth. Now, of course, it doesn't. But most people who have a binging or even just an eating disorder, you would find, are doing it. They're eating because of boredom, or they're eating because of rejection, or they're eating because of disappointment. It is their go-to safe place. And they lack truth coaches. They lack reassuring insight. They lack a life. They lack enthusiasm for life, and they've learnt the substitute for living and coping and challenging and growing. And so that becomes their go-to place. And yes, it is just another one of many, many survival kits that are there until a person gets fed up with this, this unacceptable way of coping and looks for something better.
Okay. I have a difficult time forgiving myself for much of my past, believing that I knew better, and intellectually I did. I misguidedly thought that after the age of accountability, every choice I made was either correct, God's will, or wrong, accountable sin. Am I understanding correctly now that my past choices were often survival kits and that I was enslaved, making these no free will choices at all? If this is true, God's assessment of my past will have far more grace in it than I could ever hope for.
Absolutely. I did what seemed right at the time is acceptable to God, but he now commands all men everywhere to repent and come to the knowledge of the truth. And so God has winked at our ignorance, and he has winked at our sin, and he has understood our regrets. But all he really asks is that we learn from them. Mistakes are for learning. Regret is for motivation to learn and to seek truth and pursue it. You harness your regret when it becomes a fierce passion for truth. It was worth it if it's taught you wisdom and compassion. You know, the butterfly doesn't spend the summer regretting being a caterpillar. If that's what it took, then that's what it took. And I haven't spent my life regretting my childhood or teenage sin. If that's what it took, then that's what it took. But what I do want is to make sure that those regrets are harnessed and I don't end up just beating up on myself. You know, what did you learn from your life may well be the question that Christ greets us with at our promotion in death. What did you learn may be the question, because all of life is for learning, and failure is ultimately nothing but feedback. If there is no condemnation in Christ, then how can failure possibly condemn you? It just becomes feedback by which we can learn. So for me now, my failure and my suffering is the source of my wisdom and my hunger for wisdom. It is the source of my compassion. It is the source of my empathy. And I don't ever beat myself up, but I do say, okay, I've stuffed up here. What do I need to learn from it to go forward? What a tremendously positive thinker God is, that he's not there to beat you up or give you a hard time. He just wants you to invite you to learn from the experience. You've never cried alone. He's always shared your pain, but he waits for you to look up and say, what do I need to learn from this divorce, from this failure, from this bitter regret? And what is there in here for my learning? And that's why I love Genesis 50:20, Jaron. I've just built my life on the realization that whatever man meant for evil, God intends for good. Because God will always have the last word, providing he's made welcome.
Amen.
Isn't that great?
Amen. So here's a question, Dave. How long until everything starts to sink in?
Yeah. I'm 65. It hasn't all sunk in yet, mate.
Right. Oh,
I'll tell you what, I'll give you a lifetime. You know, we have this idea that we're going to get it all sorted out and then off we go. No, life is for sorting it out. We need a lifetime for all this truth to sink in. And that's exactly what you've got. So God is patient, but he doesn't wait forever. And so that's why we've just got to get on with it. But the mission of life is to appropriate truth and for it to sink in.
So the second part of that question is, how long does this rewiring take when the truth coaches kick in automatically rather than the feelings of powerlessness and having a journey through it to get to a place of peace?
Well, the automatic answer is 21 days. I have no idea where that figure came from, but it's utterly irrelevant. The real issue is it's not how long it takes, it's how fully persuaded you are. You can be a total convert in 60 seconds, or you can still be ambivalent after 60 years.
Right.
The call is yours. Some people pay cash and some people put it on the drip feed and spend 20 years paying it off. Me, I'm a cash on the table man. I want this revelation and I want it fully and completely, and I want it now. I don't want to do hire purchase over the next 20 years by a drip here and a drip there. I want to shout Geronimo, hold my nose and leap off the cliff. And that to me is the most painless way of change, to become fully persuaded and get on with it. Not this wishy-washy, half in, half out, will he or won't he, am I or am I not, that some people live their whole life in. It's just too painful. Have you ever watched somebody getting into a swimming pool one toe at a time? Man, it's painful to watch. And usually by the time they're up to their knees, they've talked themselves out of going for a swim. I never go into a pool like that, unless it's a heated pool. And so I would encourage people, you know, how long will you remain double-minded? You know, will you remain wishy-washy and undecided for half your life, or will you become fully persuaded and receive the courage that comes with conviction and then go for it? People don't believe in or have confidence in someone who undermines themselves every time they have a thought, they have a contrary thought to oppose it. That's no good to you. That's a double-minded person who's unstable in all their ways. And there's no courage in double-mindedness. So clear up your cognitive dissonance, clear up your ambivalence, either do it wholeheartedly or don't do it until you're convinced.
So healing comes as we put our full weight on the truth.
Yes, indeed. A woman's libido comes back when she doesn't keep making love ambivalently. And a man's courage comes back when he isn't constantly divided amongst himself about what the right course of action is. You get your leadership back when you know your own mind and you live mindfully rather than living in the subconscious. And it's true, the unexamined life is an ambivalent life, an unconvinced life, a life of drifting down the river to the rapids.
Okay, so please expand on how a phobia, specifically claustrophobia, is a survival kit.
Yeah, that's a good one. The belief is that I have to be in control to be safe, and confined spaces removes my control from me. The fact is that your feelings are telling you lies. That's the first thing you've got to get your head around, that these feelings of yours are misrepresenting the situation to you. The truth is that your feelings are telling you lies, and you need to be able to push back on them. You need to betray your feelings and side with the truth against yourself, because at the moment your feelings have got too much power and they're bullying you. And the belief is that I have to fight back, and I have to be free, and I have to have exits and open doors and space around me in order to be safe. So there's your survival kit. It's that insistence that you never feel powerless, or you never be in a position of powerlessness. And that's the lie. The lie is that trust compensates for powerlessness. A roof over my head is not dangerous if I trust the architecture. Getting into an aluminium tube and zooming around the sky is not dangerous if I trust the plane and the pilot. So you'll often find that basic trust was missing in somebody who develops claustrophobia. But in fact, their problem is not with the confined space. Their problem is they've never made friends with feeling powerless. And so trust has declined and control has invaded. And now whenever they don't have sufficient control, they automatically feel dangerous. And we have to teach them to side with the reassurances against those feelings of powerlessness. I've made friends with powerlessness, and you know what? Getting old is not for cowards, because getting old means experiencing powerlessness more and more often. When you're in a wheelchair, your choices are limited. When you can't get yourself out of your own bed, your choices are limited. And when you can't think fast enough to keep your end of the conversation up, your choices are limited. So growing old is an experience of making friends with feeling powerless, whether you're ready or not.
Golly. Also, what is your opinion of neuro-linguistic programming as a method of treatment?
Well, it's a technique, and the problem is with all these techniques is that they can substitute for truth. They can substitute for insight. They have this technique now of putting a rubber band around your wrist and snapping it to cause yourself some pain every time you have a bad thought. And I get that. They're trying to create a fusion between stinky thinking and physical pain. But actually, it can work backwards on them, and they end up like a cutter cutting themselves to relieve the frustration that's building up. So don't confuse technique with truth. Neuro-linguistic programming has given us some good stuff in that it's taught us that people remember and recall in different ways. So it gave us the auditory memory, the visual memory, the kinesthetic memory, and it helped us understand how we store information, how we connect information, and how we label the drawers when it comes to recalling information. But on the other hand, if I'm trying to interpret people by where they're looking in the room or how they're accessing their knowledge and their memories, I'm going in the wrong direction. It's a bit like relying on body language. I never do body language in my counseling, but it may be a clue. Neuro-linguistic programming taught us, for example, that if you ask a question and you get a physical reaction from the client, it may be a neurological connection they've just made, or they may have just hit you because they are offended at the question. I'm not sure. But I do know this, that neuro-linguistic programming is of value, but it's very limited value. And I could never get as excited about it as the counselors of the 80s got when it first bust in.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So we've had a few posts in our community about feeling powerless. And earlier in this conversation, you talked about powerlessness being a delusion. Can you talk about powerlessness as a survival kit and how to work our way through that?
Well, Derek Prince wrote a booklet called The Grace of Yielding. And he said there's a time to fight and there's a time to yield. There's a time to control and a time not to control. And I think that's the key, really, Darren. I think it's choosing your battles and knowing that there is a time to be assertive and stand up for your rights and push back and set boundaries and so on and so forth. But there's also a time to say, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. There's a time to say, this is my love gift to my friend, my cousin, my family, my child. Yes, I could stand on my rights, but I forego my rights for a higher purpose, a higher value, a higher cause. And I'm not going to be a martyr because I'm not going to be resentful in this matter. I willingly give up my rights in order to achieve a higher cause. And that's where we see Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the injustice of the cross. He gave up his rights for a higher cause. On the other hand, he was also assertive when people overstepped the mark, and he pushed back fiercely and firmly on occasion when people did overstep the mark. So I suppose it's just understanding there is a time to accept powerlessness and there's a time not to accept powerlessness. And we do need the discernment and the wisdom as to know when to do what.
So powerlessness in itself is not dangerous.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So just, over the course of in the notes and also in the videos, you've talked about addiction as a survival kit. Can you give us a little bit more on addictions, around how they form and how they're healed?
Yes, indeed. Addiction is certainly a survival kit. It's one that we are convinced is still our friend. And so we have the volitional side to addiction, which says this is an asset in my life. Why would I quit it? Why would I give it up? It makes my life better. And then we have the physiological / biochemical side that says my body doesn't function well because of its reliance on this chemistry and this chemical. And so I divide addiction up into those two aspects. Is this thing my friend or my enemy? That is not a question that you can allow to remain unanswered when you're dealing with an addict. And they must be more than cognitively persuaded that it's their enemy. They must become fully persuaded at every level. And only then are they ready to go through the withdrawal process. When they are fully persuaded, then it's time to introduce the withdrawal process. And whether it's the fat in ice cream or the sugar in chocolate, whether it's the nicotine in cigarettes or whatever it might be, there's going to be withdrawal. There's going to be withdrawal from medication that you're addicted to as well. And it can range from clammy, crawly skin to nightmares, to anxiety. There's just, you name it. Where there's a chemical addiction, there's going to be withdrawal symptoms. But you prepare a client for the withdrawal symptoms by teaching them that these are not signs of danger and dread and foreboding. These are actually signs that the body is healing itself. And only when the client is armed with those truth coaches will they not freak out and panic at what the body is doing and go straight back to their addiction. So I do not allow a person to quit their addiction until they're fully prepared with the right ice axe before they start sliding down the slippery slope. I don't take them up on the ice until they're current with their ice axe. And I don't take them to quitting addiction until they've got the reassurances that they are going to need, both emotionally, psychologically, and to battle the physical symptoms that may or may not erupt in their bodies.
So one of the issues could be then that we're trying to get people to cold turkey their way out of an addiction.
And the result of cold turkey only is a dry drunk. It's a person running on willpower and behaviorism, and they will relapse. Without those truth coaches built into their thinking, there's nothing surer than that they will relapse. And that's why addicts are liars, because they want to be better, they want to be clean, they want to be out of it. And they tell all the lies they need to try and perpetuate their self-deception, and then they will relapse, and then there's more betrayal and more loss of faith, etc. I don't allow a person to stop smoking until I'm convinced that they have the reassurances and the truth coaches in place to ensure that it's going to be victorious. Otherwise, all they do is relapse and then become more convinced than ever that it's hopeless. And I don't want to be responsible for taking the addicts into a place of complete hopelessness.
Wow, thanks very much, Dave, for that. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up now, and just a couple of things before Dave finishes with the final word. Our next topic is King Lies, so that will be coming out tomorrow. Just remember that journaling and learning the practice of journaling is critical to your journey towards healing and change. So we're really wanting you to spend time journaling, using those questions, making explicit self-talk, the assumptions, uncovering truth coaches as well. And if you want to, so there's going to be another opportunity to share your journaling in the community again this week. And also don't forget to revisit your radical change goal to assess where you're up to and how you can use the content that you're learning through Mindset to progress towards achieving your goal. So just a reminder that that goal that you set is still important. So it's good to go back to that, have another look at that, have a think about how what you're learning relates to that and how you could apply some truth coaches to support you towards that change you want to achieve. So I'm going to hand over to Dave and look forward to seeing you all next week. So Dave.
Excellent. And I've been so encouraged to see you wrestling with the journals, watching the feedback, encouraged to see you wrestling with the journals, being vulnerable, being honest. Let me just say that if you start with a feeling or an emotion that's positive, then question 3 is going to expose a king truth. And if you start with a feeling that's negative, which is probably more useful and more helpful in a journal anyway, then you're going to end up with a king lie in question 3. So you're tracking back the trouble to the cause, and the cause is always a king lie. And since you're going to be studying king lies this week, just remember this to help you. The king lie is the gatekeeper in your mind. The king lie will decide whether or not you can take some more truth on, or whether or not you must remain loyal to the king lie. You see, wherever you're loyal to a king lie, it doesn't allow new truth to enter. And that's why you end up in arrested development and frozen development if you take on board the wrong conclusion as a child and then begin building your life on it. So the journal is a very effective way of exposing that king lie to you. And if you get stuck in the journal, or if it makes no sense, or you just feel like giving up, here's a truth coach to help you. Hey, it goes like this. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing badly while you get better at it. And any failure is nothing but feedback on your technique. Did you know that failure is never personal? Try and hang on to that one, and that'll really help you through the difficult assignments. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, folks, for joining in and listening in. I hope that this encourages you. I hope that it strengthens you. And I hope that it opens your mind to truth you never knew was there up until today.
Thanks, Dave.